Good evening. My name is Jerry, and I'm a believer in Jesus Christ, and I struggle with chemical dependency and compulsive behavior. I'm a grateful, recovering addict, and I'm glad to be here with you tonight. I'm honored to have the opportunity to talk to you. I'm delighted that you're part of the Recovery at Cokesbury Network. You know, Jesus has got some unbelievable things planned for you. I'm also the facilitator of the Chemically Dependent Men's Group in Knoxville, and I have been since we began this ministry back in 2003. Through the grace of Jesus Christ and the principles of this program, I'm glad to say that I've got 10 years of clean time, sobriety. This program changed my life, and it can change yours. You know, I said that my experience was with chemicals and alcohol, so I probably will use words that seem to apply to just that. But this ministry, this program, is about a lot more than that. It's about all forms of compulsive behavior, compulsive behaviors that can destroy our lives. So I want you to generalize when you hear something that seems to be drug-related. Substitute your own issue there, if you will. Because all of these compulsive behaviors are basically the same at their core. And I know that the solution is surely the same. You know, you may be laboring under the impression that you're in charge. That you're in charge of your life, your family, your finances, your future. Well, I hate to be the one to break this to you, but if you think you're in charge, you need to think again. Truth is we're actually in charge of very little. We are, however, in charge of our choices, the decisions that we make in our lives. You know, looking at me, it's probably hard to imagine me as a kid, but there was a time, and I brought photographs to prove that in case you doubted it. Well, look at that. That's where I should be getting an awe from you guys, because aren't I cute there in my little cowboy shirt? I don't know what happened to that cute, but it wore off. And that middle picture in the bottom, you can see that I'm having a big time. That was a day that I went to the water park. Yeah, I know it's a garden hose, but you know, we didn't have much. My dad was an alcoholic. My mother was a codependent. And I had no idea what any of that meant, or did I really care? Because, you know, my life was okay. That may have been the case for you. If you think back when you were a kid, did anybody ever ask you, what do you want to be when you grow up? Well, chances are you picked some occupations like fireman, policeman, doctor, maybe even an astronaut, nurse. Did any of you pick addict or alcoholic or codependent or a gambler? No, I don't think so. But yet here we are. So what happens? What is it that takes us from where we start to where we have ended up? And quite honestly, that's choices. You know, the older we get, the more complicated that becomes. And I have a couple of other photographs I want to share with you. You know, as I became a teenager, and here are my running buddies. We all got involved in choice making. And, you know, you can make one bad choice, and that's simple enough. And then that one bad choice can lead to another and another and another. And, you know, before you know it, we've become experts at making bad choices. As a matter of fact, we can make a bad choice in a New York minute. You know, at the time, it was the cool thing to do. Drink, drug, made us feel good. It allowed me to fit in. And they even said that it would help me get girls. And they lied about that one. But it was a way of coping. And I began to use that in my life to deal with the problems I encountered. And I found that I could become addicted to just about anything that would accomplish 3 goals. If it made me feel good, if it changed the way I thought, and if it took away my pain. See, my drug of choice was more. More of whatever I could get. And me and my drug of choice and all of his relatives, we became best buds. And the more time we spent together, the closer we got. But I took that habit of drug use to cope into my adult life. Here you see some pictures. I want you to notice the one on the upper left because I really had some hair at that point in time, and it's obvious from the picture. That went away too. But I used drugs to cope with life. I don't know if you remember Dow Chemical, but they had a commercial that said, "Better living through chemistry." And that was pretty much my approach to life. I got married, I had kids, I bought and sold houses, I got divorced, I had other kids, and I did all of that with my drug of choice, my best buddy. But then there came a time when my best friend turned on me. I was having to hang out with my drug of choice just to feel normal. I can assure you that at this stage of the process with an addict or an alcoholic, we're not having any fun. It's not about party anymore. It's about getting from one day to the next. And it gradually took over my life. It became the most important thing. I got up in the morning thinking about it. If I wasn't using, I was planning to resupply. It totally dominated my thoughts. And I protected that. I would lie and cheat and manipulate so that I could continue the very process that was destroying me. I'd wrap myself in denial. I would say things like, "I'm not an addict. I can quit any time I want to." Or, "Everything would be okay if people would just leave me alone." If you'd confronted me at the time about that, I would have said that I don't have a drug problem. You see, what I had was a supply problem. I just couldn't get enough. And I worked at that very diligently. But what I was doing was riding a downward spiral, heading toward the bottom. I said earlier that nobody plans to be an addict. Well, the opposite of that is true too. Most addicts don't plan to quit. It takes something to force us into recovery, to force us to the bottom. Usually that's the consequences of our own actions. Your bottom could easily be sleeping in the back seat of your car, if you've got one. It might be a hospital room. It might be a jail cell. For some, it's a coffin. I have a friend who says, "You've reached your bottom when you decide to quit digging and put down the shovel." You've reached your bottom when you decide to quit digging and put down the shovel. We don't have to lose everything we've got. Our bottom doesn't have to be a total destruction. we have the ability to take some action before that happens. And it's usually about in this part of the process that we have what's called our moment of clarity. And that moment of clarity is when we see the truth. For me, that moment of clarity happened when my then 9-year-old daughter knocked on the bathroom door, behind which I spent a lot of time doing drugs. And she said that day, "Daddy, would you come out and play basketball with me?" You know, and for some reason, those words, as simple as they are, on that day, cut through the denial, cut through the lies that I had actually begun to believe myself. And I saw myself for what I was. I saw myself as an addict. And I did not like the picture. I knew that something had to change. You know, this is really a very old story. The first time I know that it was told was about 2,000 years ago. Jesus loved to teach by telling stories. We all love a good story, and he tells this story. I'm going to read it for you. A man had 2 sons. The younger son told his father, "I want my share of your estate now, before you die." So his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. A few days later, this younger son packed all of his belongings and moved to a distant land. And there he wasted all his money in wild living. About the time his money ran out, a great famine swept over the land, and he began to starve. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and that man sent him into the fields to feed the pigs. There the young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him. But nobody gave him anything. When he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, "At home, even the hired servants have food enough to spare. And here I am dying of hunger. I'll go home to my father and say, 'Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant.' So he returned home to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, he embraced him, and he kissed him. And his son said, 'Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son.' But his father said to the servants, 'Quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get a ring for his finger, sandals for his feet. Kill the calf we've been fatting. We must celebrate with a feast. For the son of mine that was dead has now returned to life. He was lost, but now he's found.' So the party began." Now that's our story. You see, that's my story. It's your story. We decide that our plan is the best plan, and we get fixed on doing whatever it takes to accomplish that. And we take from the people around us whatever it is that we want. And then we go to a foreign land, which is to leave those things that we ought to be close to, and we squander that money in wild living. Do any of you know about wild living? Have you been there? Well, when the money runs out, the drugs run out, and the liquor runs out, and our friends run out, and so do our options. You know, when it rains, it pours. And so a great famine sweeps over our lives, and they begin to fall apart. The consequences of our behavior catch up with us. And then we have that moment of clarity, just like that young man in the story. When we come to our senses, That's a moment of clarity. Here he is, standing in a hog pen, starving, dirty, filthy. He's been without a place to live. He's got no hope, got no future. He's at his bottom. So he decides to go home. He decides to do something about it. And he makes up this speech. He creates this speech that he's going to give his father. You know, Father, I've sinned against both heaven and you. I'm no longer worthy. And so he begins this trek home, and it takes days for him to make it. And as he tops that last hill before he gets to home, the story tells us that his father saw him coming, which means his father was watching. His father was hoping that he would come home. He was waiting for his son. And he runs to him with his arms outstretched. And he grabs him up and he gives this kid a big hug. Now, this is the kid that's still covered in stink and the filth and the dirt of his own choices. The father doesn't wait for the kid to go get cleaned up. He doesn't wait for him to get a shower and a fresh set of clothes. He takes him exactly the way he is at that moment. And he kisses him. And he rejoices at the fact that his son has been lost, is now found. And that's the way our Heavenly Father treats us. He could care less what we've done or where we've been. He wants us the way we are. Some people think that they've got to get their act together before they can come to God. That's not the case at all. God wants us exactly the way we are. Now, He may not leave us that way, but that's the way He wants us. You know, God knows best. His plan is the best plan for us. In Proverbs 3:5, it says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend upon your own understanding. Seek His will in all you do, and He will direct your paths." But you know, that's not the way we like to do it. We like to do our plan. We're a little hesitant to sign on to the plan that God has for us because, quite honestly, we're afraid we're not going to like it. Well, if you haven't realized it by now, we don't have a very good track record in decision making. You know, the plans we make don't turn out too well, do they? In Jeremiah 29:11, God says, "For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. They are plans for good and not for disaster, to give you a future and a hope." How does that sound? A future and a hope. Would you like to have that? I would. You know, the creator of the universe, when He lays it out like that, we really ought to be listening. We really ought to try to regain or recover our position in His plan. And if that moment of clarity has worked, we've arrived at a point of willingness. You have to be willing to recover. If you're not willing, it won't work. You can define willingness with two questions. One, do you really want to quit? Do you really want to quit? And two, are you willing to do whatever it takes? And if you can answer those two questions with an unqualified yes, then you're ready to start your recovery. You know, if it was easy, everybody would do it. We need help. We may need some detox. We may need some time in a treatment center. We may need to spend a little while at a halfway house. We definitely need a sponsor and meetings. But the cornerstone of that recovery needs to be the 12 steps. Because, you know, as an addict, we look at recovery and it looks impossible. We've wrapped our lives around something that is too big, it's too tall, it's too wide. It seems impossible. We cannot imagine how we can never do drugs again, or drink, or gamble. Do you remember the old riddle? How do you eat an elephant? And the answer to that, one bite at a time. Well, how do you approach recovery? The answer to that is one step at a time. The steps come in the perfect sequence, one following the other. They take us on a journey, a spiritual journey, that ends in sobriety. Better than that, in a relationship with our Lord. Dr. Bob and Bill Wilson, after the turn of the century, worked on these 12 steps. I think they were inspired by God. You know, at that point in time, people really didn't think it was possible to recover from alcoholism or drug addiction. And what Dr. Bob and Bill Wilson found was that one addict or alcoholic working with another could work. As a matter of fact, they had eventually written what is called the Big Book, the AA Big Book. And if you look at chapter 5, which happens to be page 58 of that big book, it says, "Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Those who do not recover are people who would not or could not completely give themselves to this simple program." You know, that statement is actually a promise. It says that you will recover if you fully commit. As a matter of fact, I'll guarantee you that if you work 100% of the program, 100% of the time, you will recover. Now, any less than that, and the answer is uncertain. I know this to be true. It worked for me. It will work for you. It saved my life and led me to Christ. And that really brings me to step one. I think step one is the most important of all the steps because it's the first. Because if you don't begin, you cannot finish. And it reads, "We admitted that we're powerless over our addiction and that our lives have become unmanageable." I want to look at 4 words that are part of that step. And the first is admitted. You know, admitted means that we've put away the denial that has protected that set of bad choices for so long. We've had our moment of clarity and we've accepted the truth of what we've seen. No more excuses. Now we're going to accept the responsibility for our actions. And we're committed to make a change. The second word is powerless. It means that we're not in charge, that we're not in control. It means that we don't have the strength, the knowledge, or the will to recover on our own. You know, we resist the word powerless because in our mind sometimes we equate it with weakness, and weakness with low value. And so in reality, sometimes we think that being powerless is to be worthless. But you see, God doesn't see it that way. To be powerless means that we need Him. The word addiction is that thing, the drugs or whatever, that is destroying us. You know, we let it become our own little God, and we worshiped it. There is no good in it. It leads to spiritual death, physical death. The word unmanageable means really that our consequences have caught up with us. We can no longer hide. We can't manage them. They're more than we can do. And when we can honestly admit that we are not in control and that our lives have become unmanageable, we can begin our recovery. You know, we've lived our life in addiction, and we've discovered that there's no future in it. We've had our moment of clarity, and we know that we can't fix it. If you could fix it, you wouldn't be sitting here tonight. Our Father is waiting for us, just like the story that Christ told us. He's waiting. He's waiting for us even though we're a mess. This altar is open. Come kneel down at your Father's feet. Admit that you want and need His help. Let Him wrap His arms around you. He's been waiting, maybe for a long time. Start your recovery. Start it now, tonight.